Greetings, fellow detectives, Wizard Kitten here, bringing you my review of the 29th mystery in the Nancy Drew series, Nancy Drew the Silent Spy. As usual, my reviews are based on 5 separate categories. Those categories are plot, characters, setting and design, entertainment and gameplay value, and music and vibe. Each of those categories is scored on a scale of 1 to 10, and the categories are then added up for a final total possible score out of 50, and then I assign each game a letter grade as well. Just a brief warning before we get into the review. The review will contain some mild plot spoilers. I won't be spoiling any major events that will happen in the game, but the spoilers are more related to things you might see in the promotional materials, such as characters that you might encounter and things that you might get to do in the game. So without further ado, let's start talking about the plot of The Silent Spy. So for this mystery, Nancy is lured to Glasgow, Scotland, when she receives a letter that essentially tells her that everything she knows about her mother's death is a lie. Now, up to this point in the series, Nancy's mother has been mentioned, and we know that she died when Nancy was young, but we've never heard anything about why, any reasoning for that, or really anything about her mom whatsoever. So this is the first mystery that really addresses that, and it starts off by saying that what Nancy knows is wrong. And essentially what Nancy has been told is that her mother died in a car accident when she was in Glasgow, but the letter says that that is neither a true story nor the entire story. So Nancy naturally goes to Scotland because she wants to learn more about what happened to her mother, and she essentially ends up working along with a spy organization within Glasgow, an organization known as Cathedral. And with that comes a lot of dangerous tasks, a lot of shifty characters, a lot of very classic spy activities. So Nancy is essentially called to solve the mystery of what happened to her mother, and also the mystery of why she was lured to Glasgow, because the initial letter told her that it was a spy organization that was calling her. But when she gets there, she finds out that that's not actually the case, so something more sinister is going on. So it's her job to also try and figure that out. Now, I do enjoy the plot of this mystery, but I will say that I would have enjoyed the plot of this mystery so much more if it had a singular focus. Because when we have Nancy going to Scotland to solve the mystery of her mother's death, and then Nancy also solving the mystery of why she was brought to Scotland in the first place, and then the mystery that essentially takes over the entire plot because of why she was brought to Scotland in the first place, we end up with 2 very important storylines, and you can't dedicate equal attention to both of them, nor do I think you should. I think for most detectives, when we hear that we are going to solve the mystery of Nancy's mother, that's a lot more appealing, I think, to a lot of mega Nancy fans than is the mystery of why Nancy was lured to Scotland under false pretenses. That doesn't seem nearly as interesting as figuring out what happened to Nancy's mom, especially if what happened to Nancy's mother wasn't an accident and it's actually a really big deal. That sounds like a much more interesting mystery, and we really don't get any answers to that mystery, which is upsetting. That seems like the more interesting part of the plot and the deeper and more meaningful part of the plot that we could go into, but we really are left with a completely unresolved half of the mystery. And the other part of the mystery we solve, but there's still so many loose ends and there's still just too many secrets. It all ends up not coming together very nicely at the end. We do get answers. It's all kind of revealed to us within the last 20 to 30 minutes of the game. It's not something that Nancy really stumbles upon herself. She does solve a lot of her mother's clues on her own, and eventually, if you play the game enough times, you can kind of put the pieces together and get a semblance of a completed jigsaw puzzle, but it's definitely not the full picture, and I think that's pretty disappointing in a case where a lot of detectives would have liked a pretty firm answer, particularly related to Kate Drew. So, while I think the plot does does have some interesting features, and I do love that it addresses Nancy's mom and has these beautiful flashbacks that show us what Kate was like and what Nancy's relationship with her mother was like. Well, I absolutely love that. I just wish there was more of that and less of the unresolved spy mystery that isn't even resolved in a satisfying way. So ultimately, I give Silent Spy a 7 out of 10 for plot. Next, let's move on to characters. So once Nancy arrives in Scotland, she's kind of told, don't trust anyone. And people start approaching her and finding her right away. There's Alec Fell, who, when Nancy arrives in Scotland, kind of comes to her rescue when her suitcase gets stolen. And we find out that he is kind of like a private investigator, like a skip tracer kind of guy, so he's there. And then we have Bridget Shaw, who is a random Scottish citizen who is very interested in Nancy for the reason that she's an American. Again, kind of random. We have Ewan, who, that's his code name. We don't learn much else, anything personal about him whatsoever, but he is our Cathedral contact, and Cathedral is the spy organization that we're working with. And then we meet Moira Chisholm, who knew Nancy's mother and worked with Nancy's mother up until the day that Nancy's mother died. So we have those 4 characters. You might have even been able to tell by the way I was describing them that we really don't know much about any of them. We get to know a little bit more about, I would say, Alec. We get to learn a little bit more about Bridget. We really learn nothing about Ewan, and we learn surprisingly little about Moira. I would have loved to learn more about all of these characters and actually get some fully fleshed backstories and maybe some fully fleshed motives for all of these characters so that it was actually a mystery as to why we're there and how everything relates to Kate, and did any of them have anything to do with Kate's death, or why are they all there now? Why is Nancy talking to all of these random people? There's so little motivation for all of these characters, and that ends up being really frustrating. It's also really frustrating because I enjoy interacting with these characters. I think the conversations that we have with them are pretty fun. Their mannerisms and their personalities are unique and interesting. But we have very minimal character interaction. This is honestly a game where we really don't talk to characters much, and if you're a spy, you would think that one of the main ways you would gather your intel is by talking to suspects. So the fact that we have such limited conversations with them is very unsatisfying, but the fact that the characters have such poor background and poor motive is even more unsatisfying. This comes down to part of the issue of the plot as well, in that Nancy is trying to simultaneously solve the mystery of her mother's death and the mystery of why she was in Glasgow in the first place, and the deeper conspiracy that's going along throughout Scotland, this whole convoluted plot. All of them are involved in it somehow, but only peripherally. And I feel like they could have been written to be so much deeper, so much more interesting. And again, if they had focused on one single plot line, like if they had actually focused on Nancy solving the mystery of her mother's death, then I think we would have gotten a lot more interesting character interaction. It would have been a lot more moving, would have been a lot more interesting. The best character interaction we get in this game, honestly, is when Nancy calls her dad and when she calls Ned. Because they actually have some serious stakes in this case. They're extremely worried for Nancy, and we get some of the most genuine voice acting from Carson that we've had in the entire series. Just being so worried about his daughter, because obviously this is where his wife passed away, and now Nancy has gone back there and is doing essentially the same things. Like, that would be terrifying. That's the best character interaction we get in the game, because it actually feels real and it feels like there's real stakes, and he has a reason to be there saying the things that he does. We don't get great reasons for any of the other characters being there and saying that the things that they want to say. They're honestly disappointing. I like the characters, and that's what's so disappointing about it, is that I would have loved to talk to them more, and I would have loved for them to be more fully fleshed. So while they do have some great features, I think the character interaction falls unfortunately pretty flat, which is why I have to give characters a 6 out of 10. Next, let's move on to setting and design, which considers where the mystery takes place and how that is incorporated into the main mystery itself. So as I've mentioned several times already, this mystery takes place in Glasgow, Scotland, and we do get some references to Scotland as we're moving around. The game takes place in a few major locations. There's a hotel, there's a train station, there's Moira's house in Scotland, there's a location at Loch Lomond, a secret location, and there's a secret spy location. So while we have a fair number of locations, at least 2 of them are more related to spies than they are to Scotland themselves. And we do get some cool Scottish elements. We do get to see a lot of original Scottish food. There are some Scottish, many of the characters speak with Scottish accents, not all of them, but many of them, or well, I guess half of them. 2.5 of them. But again, I don't know how realistic those Scottish accents really are. They seem pretty stereotypical. We see some pretty landscapes when we go to visit Loch Lomond, and it's very beautiful, the background. We don't get to actually go look at that. But my biggest issue with the setting and design is that we have the opportunity to go to a place called the Ten Raven Pub. It's this beautiful, traditional Scottish pub. It's a whole separate location. We get there and we can never actually even go inside. Nancy literally just goes there to pick up a couple items and she never gets to go in. That's just very disappointing to me. Why would you go through the trouble of designing an entire beautiful Scottish building for a mystery that takes place in Scotland, and then Nancy doesn't even get to explore the most Scottish place in the entire mystery? Like, what's even the point of that then? It's kind of like the Screaming Banshee Inn in The Haunting of Castle Malloy, but Nancy actually got to go into the Screaming Banshee Inn. That's all it would have taken, would have been a place with some chairs, and maybe she gets to go to the back room or play a game just like she does in Haunting of Castle Malloy. But no, we just get to look at the pretty building and never go inside. That's honestly my biggest issue with setting and design, is that they have this great Scottish location that no one can even explore. And the fact that there are so many locations to look at kind of emphasizes the fact that it's still a pretty minimal game for exploration. Each of the locations that we visit, we spend a lot more time reading books or reading journals or breaking puzzles and codes than we actually do finding clues. We don't find physical clues in this game hardly at all, and that takes away from a lot of the lure of the setting and the experience for me. I wouldn't say the setting and design of this game is bad by any means. It's definitely a beautiful mystery. I think the environments are designed really well. I think they just missed a couple of really important opportunities. The Ten Raven Pub, the fact that the train station is such an integral location is a little bit weird to me. Like, why would a public space be so integral? The hotel could have been more fleshed out. There's just more that could have been done. So while I think the actual look of the game is there and the actual Scottish aesthetic is there, I do have to give the game an 8 out of 10 for setting and design. Next, we move on to entertainment and gameplay value, and I will say that this game is actually pretty fun. I don't think that the story and characters are great. I think they're fine, but they definitely could have areas of improvement. However, the game still manages to be pretty entertaining, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Nancy is doing some traditional spy activities. In this game, you might get to do things such as shooting a bow and arrow, fighting a training dummy, cracking spy codes, planting bugs, like just all sorts of cool spy things that you think about when you think of spies, you get to do in this game. There's also several fun mini games. Creating the jam cookies is definitely one of my favorite cooking games in the entire series, and I could easily sit there and do that to make money for hours. It's just very enjoyable, and it's a lot of fun. Doing a lot of the spy stuff is super fun. You feel definitely like a spy in this game, but I will say one thing that takes away from the entertainment of this is that we spend so much time reading to get our clues and not nearly enough time exploring or talking to people to get clues. So much of the game relies on Nancy finding notes from her mother, journals from her mother, letters from her mother, diaries from her mother, newspapers that deal with her mother, reports that deal with her mother, all of these written things that we need to read to get all of this information, and then we can't even ask physical characters about most of it. They either won't talk to us about it or there isn't even an option to ask them about it. So that takes away a little bit from the entertainment of the game. If that's where we're getting the majority of our information, why didn't we just stay home and like look up this information on the internet, you know? I mean, obviously Nancy needs to go there to get the information, but it just seems like you're kind of letting down on your potential for the game a little bit when you only get information through text. That takes away a lot of the enjoyment of immersing yourself in the Nancy Drew world rather than going out and exploring and talking to people and finding clues and finding secret passageways. We spend an inordinate amount of time reading, much more than any other case up to this point, and it's noticeable. It's definitely a thing. So while I think this game is really fun and offers a lot of good things, I do think they rely way too much on that. So I have to knock Silent Spy down to a 9 out of 10 for entertainment and gameplay value. Moving on to the last category of music and vibe. Now this is where the Silent Spy really succeeds for me. Just like in the mystery previous to this, Ghost of Thornton Hall, there's kind of a signature song for this case. And Kate Drew is the one with the signature song. We find out in this mystery that Kate was pretty good at playing piano and she wrote this beautiful song. And the song permeates the entire mystery. We hear this beautiful piano music throughout most of the mystery. We get it in the background. We get it when Nancy is thinking about her mother. We get it when we're thinking about Kate Drew. All of this beautiful, just soothing music. It's sad and mournful, but at the same time, it's also kind of hopeful and intriguing. I think that piano music is absolutely stunning, and that totally creates a vibe of remembering something that you've lost throughout the entire game. And that's really what Nancy is thinking about the whole time. She's remembering, while she's in Scotland, her mother, and having that piano music playing the whole time keeps that constantly in our brains. We also do get a lot of really fun Scottish music, Scottish influenced music, I would definitely say. So you can hear those bagpipes playing in the background, and that's awesome. There is also a pretty persistent vibe of spy, intrigue, danger. There's always, Nancy is constantly told, oh, you can't trust that person, oh, you can't trust anyone, dangerous things will happen to her. And that definitely makes it feel like a spy mystery, like there are actual stakes. So I think the atmosphere is there, the vibe is there, and the music is definitely there. So I think this is an area that the game excels, and I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. So if we add up all of our scores, we have a 7 for plot, 6 for characters, 8 for setting and design, 9 for entertainment and gameplay value, and 10 for music and vibe, for a total possible score of 40 out of 50 and a final grade of a B-. This game, I think, is one that had a lot of potential, but let me down, and I feel like a lot of other detectives down in a lot of areas. I think while it's a fun game to play, and while the spy atmosphere definitely brings a lot to the game, I just think the story and the characters really were not there. They definitely could have been much better. They are not the worst ones in the Nancy Drew series by any means. There is development there is story, there are some resolutions, but at this point in the series, I think we expect a lot more from the mysteries, and we expect to get a really intriguing story while still having a fun, entertaining game. We're to the point now where we should be able to have both, and this game just doesn't deliver in that area. Things are too convoluted, the writing is not great, the reasons for things happening are not fully fleshed out, which makes this mystery feel a lot more messy than I feel like it should. However, do I recommend that you play this game? Definitely. It's still a fun one. I do still enjoy playing this game, and there are a lot of elements that I really enjoy. I think some of the resolution that we get with Kate Drew is beautiful and very moving, and I think that can sometimes blind detectives when they're playing this game maybe for the first time. Like, it's beautiful, and that part is really exciting. But when you look a little bit deeper, I think there are some weaknesses to this game that I just feel the need to point out. So while I do recommend it, and I do think it's a fun game to play, I recommend it with caution, more as a way to Her Interactive to say, I think you can do better than this, because this game had so many cool elements that just weren't necessarily delivered on. However, still definitely a pretty good game, solid 40 out of 50, Would recommend, fun to play, and I think it suits the play style of a lot of different detectives. It's not super scary. The puzzles are there. They're pretty tricky, but they're manageable. There's nothing that's going to be ridiculously hard. Plus, I mean, spy stuff, that's always cool. Anyway, that is my review for The Silent Spy. Thank you so much for watching, fellow detectives. Please feel free to like this video and comment your thoughts and opinions down below. I'd be very curious to hear what you think about this game. Please also feel free to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more Nancy Drew content. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you soon.